What's going on, guys? Ethan here. This week I'm bringing you my official year-end review of my 2022 archery season here in Missouri and some of the gear and equipment that I used that definitely aided in my success, and kind of some takeaways and wins, losses that I had throughout the season, adjustments that I had to make, and what some of that stuff kind of looked like. So anyway, guys, stick around and we're going to jump right into it. The first point that I want to talk about was tactics. I really focused hard this year on paying attention to the wind, playing the wind, being where I need to be when I need to be there, and trying to be picky about it. Granted, there was a few different occasions where I kind of rolled the dice and gambled with a less than desirable wind, hunting parallel winds and things like that. But in general, I was much more picky this year about winds and thermals and paying attention to those things than I was in the past. And I definitely saw a reaction from that, and I think it definitely aided in my success, why I wanted to bring it up. That would be one topic. The other portion of that would be not being afraid to switch things up. I started out the season hitting a stand that I thought was going to produce really well. It was a stand that I had set up and moved in the summertime and had really anticipated high movement in that spot. I was really pretty out of the game. I didn't have a lot of movement for the first week and a half of season. I had a hunch that I needed to move down to this ditch crossing, or this ditch intersection rather, where two major drainage ditches for a field can merge. I did a run and gun style setup. Took my climber tree stand, moved it down there, and started hunting there. Instantly started seeing deer. So I was out of the game by, maybe 150 yards, but in September or early October, whenever, if you're out of the game 150 yards with the foliage and not a lot of leaves on the ground yet, you may never know that you're out of the game, because the deer are going to move through without you ever seeing them. And in this case, that was exactly what was going on. So definitely not being afraid to switch things up and make whatever changes that need to happen, and just not being bullheaded just because your heart is set on the fact that this is where I want the deer to be. This is the spot that is perfect for a deer to come through and to be able to get a good close shot. And you have to always remember, it's probably one of the most rudimentary but important lessons in hunting whitetails. You have to hunt them where they are, not where you want them to be. Granted, we are fortunate in the Midwest to be covered up in deer for the most part, and so it's not that difficult to find deer. But in my instance, I was out of the game for the first 2 weeks of season by 150 yards. If I had been in that other tree, who knows, I might have tagged out opening day, but that's just not what happened. So takeaways from tactics is wind and not being afraid to make moves and do whatever changes necessary and go where the deer actually are. The second big key point that went into my success this season was my arrow build and just my general bow tune. For those of you who didn't watch any of my prior videos, I was shooting the Timber Ridge recurve this year, 45 pounds, 60-inch bow with a D97 Flemish twist string. A overall weight on my arrows, I'll show you my broadheads and all here. The overall was with a 200 grain German Jaeger broadheads up front, solid double bevel broadheads, 25 grain insert, 340 spine Carbon Legacy or Easton Carbon Legacy shafts, and 4-fletch 3-inch trad vanes. My overall arrow weight is coming in somewhere around 575 grains, and these were shooting at 170 feet per second on the money whenever I had them chronoed. So not shooting super fast even for a traditional setup like this, even though this is a fairly I would think you would consider this more of a static recurve. This isn't a very aggressive curve on these limbs, but they're definitely still very forgiving and producing some good speeds and some hot arrows coming out of this bow. And putting a lot of time into a good tune. Tune is critical. If your arrow is not flying flat and straight, you're robbing so much energy from yourself. Like I said, these bows are only shooting, like mine's shooting right at 170. That's not very fast, whenever you compare it to a compound that's shooting 270, right? So don't rob efficiency from yourself if you don't have to. If you're going to put your time somewhere, put it into good arrow tune, good bow setup, and a lot of practice. 3 of those 4 whitetails were complete pass-throughs, arrows buried in the dirt on the other side of where I shot the deer. Not just shot through, hanging out the other side. It was shot all the way through, stuck in the ground. If I didn't have a good arrow tune, especially shooting 47.5 pounds on the fingers, I don't think I would have got those kinds of results. So good tune definitely went into playing in success and aiding in my success rather. And another huge point I want to talk about, I talked about it in a whole video a couple weeks ago on fletchings, was these AAE trad vanes. And every deer that I shot this season from 1 to 4 was alert. I had to stop those deer to get a shot. They didn't stop on their own, and they were loaded and ready to go, at the drop of anything, and they didn't move an inch. I had zero, and it literally means zero reaction out of every deer that I shot prior to the impact of the arrow. And for any of you who have shot any amount of deer or spent any amount of time bow hunting, compound or recurve, you know that that's a pretty profound discovery to make, that these arrows are shooting that quiet and fast that I'm able to make shots on alert deer, no factor. So a lot of time and effort, and a lot of the money is invested in my tune, my arrow build, and the time that I've got invested into cutting arrows, gluing in different components and whatever to have gotten to this point. And that time was all very well spent. So just be willing always to revisit your setup and make adjustments wherever needed on your setup to be getting the most efficiency out of your bow, and to also not have to worry about it, bulletproof it, and so you have peace of mind whenever the moment of truth comes. The sharpness of your broadheads is paramount. I had 2 deer that I made marginal shots on that I would not have recovered. I say again, would not have recovered if it wasn't for sharp broadheads. Sharp broadheads can cover a multitude of sins, and I definitely learned that this year. Which leads me into my third point that I want to make is practice. I spent, obviously, every year I spend countless hours on the range shooting and putting in the reps, shooting from different positions, different yardages, and I focus tremendous on practice. We've all heard the old saying that perfect practice prevents piss poor performance, right? Bow hunting, especially traditional bow hunting, is the purest, I think, form of that. If you're not tuned in, if you're not present with that bow, if you're not fully engaged, and you haven't put in the necessary time and the arrows through that bow to be confident and comfortable, then you're going to struggle. I made, like I mentioned earlier, 2 marginal shots on deer, and I'll briefly expound on both of those. The first one was on a spike buck that I stopped at about 22 yards, and due to some things that we'll get in the next point that I want to make, I ended up shooting about 6 inches forward on that deer. He was walking from my right to left, so I ended up shooting him basically in front of his leg, base of his neck, and took out his windpipe. And just some little imperfections in my system and some other things that, again, I'll get into here in a moment, led to that shot happening the way that it did. And I revisited that bad shot and played that scenario out every way possible to make sure it didn't happen again. The second shot that I made was just a rushed shot on my part. That's plain and simple what it was. When I went to stop that deer, she actually spooked and jumped forward and away from me a few steps. So whenever I'm already at full draw, that I had to adjust myself and resettle back in, and I was trying to take a shot before she left for good, and it just didn't work out, unfortunately. And I shot back. I hit straight intestines, clipped liver, and she ultimately didn't make it that far, but I did have to go back later in the rain, no blood trail, and was very fortunate to be able to find that deer again. In both those situations, I found flaws and things I could have done differently, and it forced me to get back out on the range, stay on the range, and practice, even during season, and be fully engaged in what I'm doing. Some people will say that form and certain aspects of shooting on the flat range don't pertain to bow hunting, and I couldn't disagree more. You have to have, and I'll swear by this forever, that you have to have a baseline, something that you fall back on. You are only as good as your level of training, because that's what you're going to fall back on whenever you're stressed, when your adrenaline's up. That's what's going to happen. You're going to fall back on whatever time you've put in on the range. And if it's not much, then you don't have much to fall back on. You have to have a baseline. You have to have fundamental form and technique that you're putting into each and every shot, so that whenever the moment of truth comes, maybe you're not going to go through that multi-step process, but you're not going to be too far off of that. Practice and implementing a form and technique is critical. And the shots that I made and some of the situations I had could have been a heck of a lot worse if I hadn't put in the time that I had. So that in and of itself is huge and contributed major to my success. So the last thing I want to go into is some of the clothing and gear that I used that really helped out this season. It really made a difference and contributed to my overall not only comfort and success, but just made me more efficient in the woods in general whenever it came to getting in the stand, doing what I need to do, and going through my hunt. So the first thing, and important because of a story that I just mentioned a couple minutes ago, was clothing choices. I am big on taking the time to layer correctly and figure out what is going to be the best combination for you. And for me, on cold days, to avoid as much bulk as possible, I like to use a merino wool base layer, fleece, like this grid fleece, for a mid layers over top of that, and then finish off with some kind of poly or like a synthetic like this. This is a Wooby hoodie, and it works very well. I like the polyester outer layers. They break wind really well. They insulate really well. And just these three things, you would be surprised at the temperatures that I was able to comfortably set in a stand. And the reason I mentioned that prior story, which was the spike buck, because of unnecessary and extra bulk I had on around my shoulders and everything, just with the combination of clothes I was wearing. It was one of the first real cold days of the season. I ended up with some bulky layers, and it hindered my range of motion. And what ultimately happened was I'm sitting there at full draw wondering when my clicker is going to go off, because I didn't have the range of motion to pull through my clicker like I normally would. And that little hiccup almost cost me that deer, and it ultimately resulted in a bad shot. So I definitely revisited hard my layering system after that and made sure to stay true to that. And for me, for several years now, and this year is no exception, merino wool against the skin, fleece mid layer, and something like this for like a polyester or down outer layer, and it really fights off the cold and allows the most range of motion possible. So definitely invest the money and time into figuring out a good clothes layering system, and you will not only be able to stay warmer and hunt longer, but in a situation like that, it could mean your success by not having bulky layers on. So after that, some of the gear that I used, it's no surprise that I'm a very minimalist guy. So this is a new harness that I haven't really had a chance to hunt with much. I did some rifle hunting with this, but this is a mountain bino harness from Sitka. This is something that I wanted to do some testing on for a long time, and I bought one full price, and I love it, and I'm looking forward to many seasons ahead using this. This just kind of incorporates my system and the way that I do things by keeping a few key things close to my chest, and having extra stuff on my chest rather than just carrying it with me in a pack or whatever. And I used this bag back here for some of that. Prior to this one, for me, was the cat's pajamas, and I really tried hard to stay away from a backpack, and I feel like I did that very successfully. But good glass, good optics, like my Vortex binoculars were huge this year, and just being able to glass, and they're so important. A good set of binoculars is over the moon important. So having a chest rig and binos, good binos, always at the ready, huge as always. This is another new piece of gear, but a similar principle to what I've already been using. This is just a regular old fanny pack. This is fairly cheap, like a $20 fanny pack off of Amazon, but it's made pretty well, and I like it. And I had been using my leather woodsman's belt all season. That's what I wore every deer that I shot this year, and almost every hunt that I went on prior to this. And having something around my waist or on my belt like that to carry a few extra small items. These are things I usually carry in the woods anyway. If you guys want to know what that list looks like, go back and watch my woodsman's belt video that I did earlier this year. Check that out, and that kind of goes over more of the contents of this. But that general minimalist setup that I wanted to test out this year, of just something on around my waist or a belt pouch or whatever, like, or something like this fanny pack, and then a chest pack and no backpack, proved incredibly versatile for me, and really helped keep me as hands-free as possible, with everything being right at the ready and not having to worry about struggling with a pack up in a tree stand or anything like that, and just one less item that I had to carry with me. And it was comfortable. It didn't hinder any movement. It didn't hinder my ability to shoot or move and pull stakes and go hunt a different setup or whatever. It's just really quick, efficient setup, and I'm probably planning on sticking with something like this, a very minimal type setup like you see for the foreseeable future. And I'll do more videos about it as I refine the system, but this very slick setup proved beneficial by leaps and bounds this season, and definitely aided in my success. And I just did a video, my year-end review of my GB2 by Stroop Knives. This is the second deer season that this has made it through, and it's performed flawlessly. I'm huge on a good blade. I love a good blade. Just with everything that I do in my lifestyle, they're so critical to me. And my blade from Stroop Knives absolutely fit that bill, and handled all the tasks that I put it through, hunting, field dressing, and even breaking down and packing out whitetails over the past couple years. And it took it like a champ. Guys, this video has been long enough, but I wanted to kind of bring full circle my entire season and all my harvests so you guys can glean that information as well. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Please be sure to like and subscribe. Stay safe, shoot straight, and I'll catch you next time.